Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio.
I'm compelled to speak at least one sentence in Irish on what is an exciting day for us, the first day of the 5th Irish presidency of the Security Council. We're really looking forward to taking your questions and even to answering some of them. But to begin, Ambassador Byrne-Nason would like to say a few words by way of introduction, so I'll be very happy to give her the floor. Ambassador, the floor is yours, and you can just turn on the mic. There we go. It's on. Yeah, you're right.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you all here and to those online as well. So today, as Owen said, proud day to be Irish here at the UN. We became the President of the Security Council for just the 5th time in Ireland's history. So we're now sitting at the head of that iconic horseshoe table for the first time actually in 20 years. The last time we sat there was in 2001. And so honoured, privileged very much to be leading a great young team here in New York at the Irish Mission. We're ready to deliver what we hope will be, well, certainly will be by any standard, an independent and an empathetic presidency. We plan to listen as well as to lead, and we will all work to ensure transparency around the work that we do every single day at the Council. I'm very proud to be the first Irish woman and the first Louth woman. Doesn't mean a lot to many of you, but that's the smallest county in Ireland, and I'm certainly happy to say I'm representing County Louth today to chair the Security Council. I might start by highlighting the three events that we're planning at political level. The first will take place actually a week from today, next Wednesday, the 8th of September, and will focus on a DNA issue for Ireland, actually, at the UN, peacekeeping. And in particular, we look at peacekeeping and transitions. We look at what happens when peacekeeping missions come to an end, and really how the UN can continue the vital work it does on the ground, sustaining peace when a peacekeeping mission is over. The Irish Minister for Foreign Affairs and Defence, Simon Coveney, will chair that meeting, and we expect our briefers to include the Secretary-General himself and the former President of Liberia, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. And we're currently in negotiation on a draft resolution on the subject of transitions, and we really hope to see that adopted because we want to see at least the creation of a shared understanding of what transitions is about. We also want our presidency very much to be a forward-looking one, and so in High Level Week we plan one debate on climate and security. This is going to be chaired by our Prime Minister, An Taoiseach, as we call him, Micheál Martin. Climate change, existential issue for humanity, we know that. It's also, in our view, a peace and security issue. And from the Sahel to the Horn of Africa to Myanmar, we're seeing that climate change drives and multiplies conflict, insecurity, it exacerbates fragility. And so this meeting is designed to be a platform at which we can have the heads of state and government deepen awareness of just how those climate risks are contributing to the crisis agenda the Security Council is engaged with. And we also want to look and see going forward how the Security Council itself can address them. I'm delighted that we'll also have with us on that day the Secretary-General who will brief the meeting, and we'll also have a representative of civil society. And then our third and final political event will focus on disarmament, certainly a leitmotif for Ireland and Irish foreign policy at the UN for decades now. And our Foreign Minister, Simon Coveney, is expected to chair that meeting also, marking the 25th anniversary of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. And now I'm going to take a little point of personal privilege, if I may. So for the month of September, just outside the office that Ireland will occupy as President of the Security Council, we've just this morning put hanging my favourite poem from Ireland's Nobel laureate poet Seamus Heaney. It's from the Republic of Conscience, and it will hang there for the month. And at the end of that poem, for those of you who haven't read it, I recommend you do today. At the end of that poem, the protagonist is told that she is now the ambassador of conscience. And one highlight of the month is that we'll also bring in members of the elders who, in my view, in many ways are, I think, a bit like that ambassador of conscience, ambassadors of principle. Heaney famously evoked in that poem, but we hope to hear their individual and collective voices from the elders at the table of the council. Particularly happy, as you know, the elders formed by Nelson Mandela, but now chaired by Ireland's former President Mary Robinson. She's an inspiration to me, has been to many Irish people, Irish women in particular, and it will be a great privilege to be alongside her as she briefs the council with colleagues from the elders, one of whom, known to many of you here, Lakhdar Brahimi, is a past experienced mediator at the UN. Those of you who know me will also not be surprised to hear that women, peace and security will be a golden thread running through our presidency. It's a thread that is going to infuse not just the Irish presidency, but it's also part of a trio of women, peace and security presidencies, with Kenya and then Mexico agreeing to prioritise women, peace and security throughout the Council's work. So that will run from September through October and November. You're going to see this in bringing women peace builders whose voices we will bring to the table. And I always say it again today, being in the room and at the table is where we women belong. Of the many country situations on the agenda, none obviously more pressing than Afghanistan. As you know, we'll shortly begin negotiating the mandate of UNAMA, the UN mission, and we will be chairing a debate on the topic in the Security Council. Clearly, much remains uncertain. One thing I certainly think I can be clear about is that it's, the real litmus test of the new dispensation in Kabul will be how it treats its women and girls. The brave women and girls of Afghanistan have already endured much, and we believe the protection and promotion of their human rights must be at the very heart of our collective response to the crisis. And that includes in looking at the mandate of UNAMA. So just to wrap up, saying I'm really looking forward to working with all of you in the course of the month as presidency. We know your role in covering the work of the UN is critical, and I have the deepest respect for the work of the free media. And you open the doors of the Council to the wider world. You explain what we as diplomats often can't do. So we want to facilitate that throughout the month. And I'm at your disposal, and certainly you know the team, you know Martin and Owen here in the room, but the whole team at the Irish Mission happy to be at your disposal for the month. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. We will open up for some questions now. We will start, of course, the Security Council is an institution of tradition, no less than the UN Correspondents Association, so it's my great pleasure to give the first question to Valeria from ANSA.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, and thank you, Ambassador, and we wish on behalf of ANCA the best of luck for the months ahead. My question is on Afghanistan. So what are the next steps in the Security Council beside the renewal of UNAMA? Are you planning to further discuss the safe zone proposed by President Macron or other steps? And also, if I can have a comment from you on the abstention of Russia and China on the resolution, do you think it can undermine the efforts of a unified response from the international community? Thank you so much.
So for this question, I'm going to go straight back to the Ambassador. Thereafter, I'm going to take questions in groups of 3. So just make eye contact, give me a hand signal, and I'll try and keep a note here. And after a little bit, I'll certainly be going also to our colleagues on the internet. But for the first...
We don't really like that.
No, you prefer to go one-to-one?
Yes.
Okay, fine. Well then, we'll happily follow the tradition. Well noted. Okay, Ambassador, one by one, over to you.
Sure. Well, thank you, Valeria. On Afghanistan, I can tell you that we had the traditional ambassadorial breakfast this morning, and Afghanistan was absolutely front and centre in our discussions. So while we will be, as presidency, managing a busy agenda in the month of September, I have no doubt that our focus will be brought again and again to the issue of Afghanistan, whether that's in formal or informal discussions amongst us. We have the responsibility as presidency to look at the UNAMA mandate, and that's a very important task for us. We need to look at what the next steps for the UN on the ground can be. and my view would be that we simply must get it right. We will want to see a robust human rights mandate for the future work of the mission, and not least, I've said in my introductory remarks, that also particularly means that the full, equal and meaningful participation of women is respected. The resolution that we just adopted, 2593, was unequivocal in that regard and in relation to the role of women. It was very strong also in terms of the language on the humanitarian crisis. And so while UNAMA will be looking at the short to medium term management on the ground, I think the remarks of the Secretary General regarding the humanitarian catastrophe that's looming now were really shocking, but probably frankly not so surprising. We're seeing reports that WFP will run out of food, and that's an issue that raises, or that people on the ground, we've seen reports that the WFP and their support to people will mean that there is a food shortage. So we will be working to make sure that humanitarian access, unhindered, unfettered humanitarian access. We've seen that we know 18 million people are in need of support, of whom less than half now seem to be accessible, particularly in the rural areas, so that's a really important issue. You raised the question of a united voice of the Security Council. Certainly, if you listened to the debate on the day, you heard me say that we regretted that we didn't speak with one voice. I was relieved we spoke, for sure. I think that one of the concerns we bring to the table in the Security Council is that inaction by the Security Council undermines its message. So we really do need to be seen together to act. We would have preferred it to be united, but I think that the core of the message around human rights, around the humanitarian issues, and indeed the message on terrorism and the securing of Kabul airport were all very strong messages. Would have been better at 15, but a strong message nonetheless from the Council.
Thanks very much, Ambassador. And we're going to go to Edie from the AP now.
Thank you very much. Madam Ambassador, a quick follow-up on Afghanistan. The resolution that was adopted didn't really have any teeth to ensure enforcement. What can the Security Council really do to try to ensure that the gains, especially for women over the past 20 years, are kept? And because that's one of the big themes of your presidency. My question was really also about Tigray, where the situation is deteriorating also on the ground for the humanitarian needs of the millions of people there. Do you expect the Council to take up this issue, and what might it do? Thank you.
Well, thanks, Edie, and I'm so honoured by your green presentation today. It was really wonderful. I'm Kelly Green, if ever there was Kelly Green. Look, Edie, on the situation in Afghanistan, in straight answer to what can we really do now, my answer is do not look away. We will not take the focus off this issue during the month of September. We know that it's a very volatile situation on the ground. We know that there are a lot of uncertainties. We still haven't seen what kind of dispensation that we expect. But what we do know is that whatever form of government emerges in Afghanistan, there is no way that the support of the international community is not needed. And if you talk about teeth, it's in terms of an incentive for cooperation with the international community. You've just heard the statistics from the Secretary General. I know that Ramiz did a briefing earlier today with some shocking numbers and realities there also. The international community is needed as a partner in Afghanistan, but it's not a partnership that it's a partnership that will need to be earned. We have said several times that there's no point in the Taliban telling the international community what it wants to hear. We will judge the Taliban by their actions, not by their words. And I say that absolutely specifically in relation to the vague assurances that we've had around the treatment of women and girls, the qualified treatment of women and girls. A spokesperson in Qatar yesterday saying women may not be allowed top posts in the cabinet. This won't stand for Ireland. This is not the type of full, meaningful and equal participation we're looking for. So we will look for something very concrete, the commitments that were made, some of which were picked up in the resolution and more of which will be brought to the fore, I have no doubt, in the discussion in September, including in how the UN can deliver the much needed support through its own offices and agencies on the ground. On Tigray, I'm glad you raised it. It's something that in the 8 months Ireland has been on the Security Council, we have consistently shone a light on. We are deeply concerned about the situation in Ethiopia, the humanitarian situation and the ongoing reports of alleged sexual abuse and violence on the ground. There's a de facto blockade in Tigray. We know there's a looming famine. There are hundreds of thousands of people who need food, who need access to basic public services. We were encouraged by the recent discussion where we heard from the Secretary General that he is engaged in backroom quiet diplomacy. The African Union has now appointed a special envoy, former President Obasanjo of Nigeria. We will watch how those diplomatic initiatives are handled. But again, it's by action and not by words. We've heard Prime Minister Abiy make several commitments. We want to see him follow through on those. We want humanitarian access. We need to see, of course, in Tigray, as we've called out several times, for an immediate ceasefire. We need to see that the humanitarian access is granted. We also want to see banking, telecoms restored in Tigray itself. And we know that a political dialogue should commence so that we can see a solution. But to go back to the point, Edie, we will be focused on Tigray in the course of the month. On Ethiopia, we're concerned also about the risks to the region and the spillover effects. We've clearly seen other actors in the region engaged on the ground in Ethiopia, and that's a major worry. And I think if you listened particularly to our very knowledgeable, astute African colleagues at the Security Council recently, you heard from them clear messages that there's a big concern amongst those who know the region best as well.
Sure, just so we know where we're going, I can see some hands, but the next three questions I have on my list already are from Sherwin, Ibtisam, and then David. Okay, so Sherwin, starting with you in the front row. Thanks.
Thanks, Owen. So from Green Hills College in Drogheda to President of the Security Council.
Bravo.
It must be a moment of personal satisfaction for you, Ambassador. Congratulations on your presidency. I'm going to stick with Tigray, Edie, stealing my thunder here. You mentioned the three things, right? Immediate ceasefire, unrestricted humanitarian access, creating conditions to allow for the start of an Ethiopian political-led dialogue. What's the role of the Security Council in what you called for, what the Secretary General called for last Thursday, in pushing the parties to these three goals? And are you satisfied with what you are seeing? You mentioned the appointment of former Nigerian President Olusegun Obasanjo. Does the AU demonstrate the requisite urgency that this crisis demands? Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Sherwin, and I know that Our Ladies College Green Hills Drogheda will be thrilled with your introduction. Thank you. Look, Sharon, are we satisfied with what the Security Council has been able to do so far in Tigray on Ethiopia? No. That's why we have consistently come back. We have made steps forward, but of course we're still facing, as we just described to Edie, a really worrying humanitarian situation on the ground, and millions of displaced people across Ethiopia, with the famine looming that could really rival a famine of decades, of the last 2 decades. So it's a brutal situation on the ground. The Security Council's first role is, again, to keep the issue in the front of its mind, in the front of its attention, and we will do that as presidency. We have managed to do that. I'm often asked, does a small country have any role at the Security Council? We have managed to insist on this issue come forward for the last 8 months. So in the chair, you can rely on our attention in that regard. Certainly the African Union and the question of urgency, it's a challenging, complex crisis for the African Union. Based in Addis Ababa, we recognise across the African Union that there is a need to look to a major leader in Africa, a country like Ethiopia, undergoing a catastrophic crisis, and so it's not a simple, straightforward position for the African Union to adopt. But I'm very encouraged that recent discussions at the highest political level have led to the appointment of someone who has enormous respect, not just in the African Union, but globally. And so we will be very happy to put the weight of the Council, and certainly as I can speak for the presidency, not for the Council, for Ireland, we will seek to bring the Council's attention to his work. The Secretary-General helpfully keeps us abreast of his discussions, so we will keep the focus on the situation. We also are working, we've heard a number of briefings from OCHA, particularly sobering from Martin Griffiths, who has visited the region recently, who knows what the facts on the ground are, and we want to keep also the attention focused on the developing situation in real time, what the facts are as opposed to projected anticipation of challenge in Ethiopia. We know that Rosemary DiCarlo has been on a mission there. The US has a special envoy, Jeff Feltman, well known to many of you here. We're taking all that advice as well as President of the Security Council, so we will keep ourselves very well informed.
Thanks, Ambassador. Next, we're going to Al Arabi and Abitassam.
Thank you, Ambassador. Good to see you again. I have first a follow-up on Afghanistan and the meeting next week and regarding the UN mandate. My question is there a specific changes you would like to see or a language regarding the mandate and the renewal of the mandate? And then my question is on Iran, and Ireland is facilitator regarding the GCPOA. I know that the high-level meeting looks far away from now, but in 3 weeks, are we going to expect any meetings on this issue? Is there any updates on this regard? Thank you.
Well, thank you. On UNAMA, just to say that, despite the fact that the situation changes hour by hour, it's still early days in terms of having a good perspective as to where we will be on the 9th of September, which is when we will be discussing the UNAMA mandate. But certainly work has begun behind the scenes already amongst colleagues. I think what we need to do is to make sure that there is a firm foundation for the work of the UN going forward, even if it's not a foundation that we can say will be the definitive one for a longer term perspective. The work clearly has to go on, if only to reinforce the point I made earlier about the need for humanitarian access, the need to ensure that the work of the UN on the ground in terms of human rights, the protection of women and girls in particular, can continue. So I know that there will be, on Ireland's part, certainly a prioritisation of looking at those aspects. I think that we will want to hear from the Secretary-General about what his own team on the ground are telling him in terms of their own capacities. We need to see how many UN staff are in Afghanistan and what their capacity to work with the new regime will be. And of course, by then, we hope there will be some form of, if you like, institutional interaction, because until now, we haven't seen a government emerge from the Taliban. And depending on what that looks like, we will have to take stock and consider how we manage the discussion. I think you can take it that we will be ambitious in the way that we chair. We will listen also, I think, importantly, to the voice of regional countries. We want to hear from the neighbours, from the neighbourhood. It's an important opportunity for us to take stock of all views as we go to work on the UNAMA mandate. On Iran, you're right, we are the facilitators of JCPOA, and we have been working quietly behind the scenes, always with that objective of seeing this absolutely unprecedented and rather extraordinary diplomatic achievement put back on the rails. We want to see all parties back fully participating in the JCPOA. We've gone into a period post-election in Iran of just a wait and see. We want to see the work in Vienna start again. We certainly want to see the Iranians stop their enrichment program and get back into respect of the IAEA safeguards. We tell our Iranian friends that. Others tell them that. It's an important part of the wider picture. I just finish on the point that there are no plans at the moment for anything major. Of course, the contacts in the course of High Level Week will be critical. There is a huge degree of support to all the parties to get back to the table on the JCPOA. I think, I mentioned to you nuclear non-proliferation in my introductory remarks. I think it's not just a nuclear non-proliferation issue, although it is, of course, at its core to contain a nuclear ambition, but it's absolutely a regional security issue. And we see huge potential positive spillover were we to get the JCPOA back on track. We think that the entire region could benefit from that in so many ways. So we're full steam behind this. Minister Simon Coveney maintains his contacts with all of the actors on a regular basis, and he will also be here, hopefully COVID allowing, in High Level Week. I have no doubt it will be an issue he will be addressing while he's here.
Thanks, Ambassador. Next up is going to be David from Bloomberg, and then Brian O'Donovan from Radio Telefís Éireann. After that, I will go online to take 3 questions from those who are first in the chat on the WebEx, and then we're going to come back in the room where there is still lots of interest, so lots to get through. Thanks very much. David.
Thank you so much for doing this. Ambassador, the last time the Taliban ruled over Afghanistan, it was recognized by maybe a handful of countries. Do you expect it to be different this time around? And secondly, if Afghanistan doesn't deliver on some of those issues that you mentioned, the litmus test specifically on girls and women, what are some of the tools that the Security Council could use to send a signal to the Taliban on that? Thank you.
Thanks, David. Well, look, you ask a handful recognised, will it be different? My question is, will the Taliban be different? And I think that's the real question. We have had, statements from them suggesting they have evolved in some way. We haven't yet seen the evidence of that. From what we hear from the UN, from what we see on the ground, and from past behaviour, there's no sign that there's a different Taliban, certainly in relation to a marker for any society, in my view, which is the way women and girls are treated. So we'll wait and see what is different in their behaviour. I'll repeat myself, vague assurances won't buy recognition. We will need to see exactly what kind of regime we are dealing with. And I think in any general discussions I've had with members of the Council, the question of recognition is not a question I would expect to deal with tomorrow morning as President of the Council. Is there a red line issue? I think human rights, when you come to speaking as Ireland, certainly human rights and respect for international law are red line issues. There are, if you want to take your place among the nations of the earth and to lead a country, you respect international law, respect international humanitarian and human rights law, and they're the measures that we will use going forward. So, as I said, trust is earned. It's not something that, or indeed engagement, has to be earned. So we will be watching.
Thanks, Ambassador. Brian from RTE.
Ambassador, last month the US asked that politicians in member states not travel here for the month of September to avoid any kind of super spreader event. You've announced a visit by the Foreign Minister, the Taoiseach, and then another visit by the Foreign Minister. What was the thinking there, and could those appearances not have been done virtually? Thank you.
Well, thanks, Brian. certainly any travel to the United States, as I understand it, by any Irish government minister would be subject to COVID protocols, to the advice from the host country and indeed to the advice of our own authorities back in Dublin. I know the Foreign Minister and the Taoiseach are watching that. We would love to have them here. We want to see them in the chair at this moment, which is a momentous moment for Ireland, but I know they will absolutely respect all COVID protocols. The UN itself is going to manage in a more limited way. As you know, there will be some virtual hybrid meetings, not of the Security Council, but the way we work in the Security Council since we went back to in-person meetings is that we can't have half virtual and half in person, so we don't do that. We want to run an open and transparent Security Council, and it would be our hope that COVID will allow Irish ministers, particularly the Foreign Minister and the Taoiseach, to be with us at this really important time.
Thanks, Ambassador. I'm going to take 3 questions from cyberspace with the indulgence of the technicians, starting with Philippe from AFP. Go ahead, Philippe. We'll see if we can hear you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ambassador, for this briefing. The follow-up on Afghanistan and the UNAMA mandate. If I understood well, you are not looking for technical renewal for this mandate. And do you know if there is already some talks with the Taliban about what they want? Thank you.
Thanks, Philippe. And if it's possible to turn up the volume slightly in the room, it's just a little bit hard to hear at the front. But Ambassador, we'll go to you, and I'm going to go back to Arab News, Ephraim and Pam Falk online before coming back to the room. But over to you, Ambassador.
Oh, Philippe, thank you. I wouldn't like to anticipate what the nature of the decision will be on the UNAMA mandate. I think that we really need to have the discussion on the 9th of September. As you know, the mandate proper runs until the 17th of September. And I think I was hinting earlier on that, I see you there, Philippe, things change hour by hour in Afghanistan. So I think it would be rather unusual if I were to anticipate exactly what will happen, what a technical rollover looks like, whether it's in terms of a period of time or in terms of the content of the mandate. We will have to discuss that, obviously, with all of the members of the Council. The pen holders have already begun to do some of that work, Norway and Estonia, and we are engaging individually with Council members. So I wouldn't preempt what the outcome will be, other than to say it will be a very serious stock take that we will do. I think a really important debate that we will have on the 9th, and then we will need to assess what the best outcome is. The Secretary-General, I've already had discussion with him about this, ongoing engagement with him, with Ramiz and others on the ground to know exactly what is needed and how they would see it's manageable. That if you think of the name of the mandate, it's the UN Assistance Mission. We want to ensure that that assistance is under constrained and complicated circumstance is the best we can make it. And as to what the Taliban want, I'm afraid my answer is I don't know. We haven't seen yet what the Taliban intend to say they are as a government, and we haven't yet seen a program for their interests. I'm sure that they will realize very quickly, with an economy that's imploding, with a humanitarian situation that's dire, and with a population, we've seen the media coverage of people queuing up to get cash, with hundreds of thousands of their citizens displaced and trying to get across borders. They have a very complicated situation, and I didn't even mention ISIL-K. So, we know that what the Taliban will want, I'm sure, in leading a country is to try and manage some stability, but I won't go further than that.
Thanks, Ambassador. Merci, Philippe. Now I'm going to go to Ephraim from Arab News and then Pam before coming back to the room. So, Ephraim, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Owen. Always good to see you, Madam Ambassador. I have a question on Syria. Many people who are working on the Syrian files, including academics, human rights defenders, activists, seem to be frustrated that such a tremendous amount of energy was spent last year over the humanitarian delivery mechanisms, which many believe should be a no-brainer, at the expense of other equally, if not more important issues, more thorny issues such as detainees, the forcibly disappeared, and the political process as well. As a co-pen holder of the Syrian humanitarian file, do you envision a way in which the Security Council could settle the issue of humanitarian delivery mechanism once and for all, and take the focus and invest it in those other issues that seem to have been stalling for a while? Thank you.
Well, thank you. I wouldn't disagree with the underlying premise of your question, which is, can't we surely get the humanitarian issues right and move on to trying to solve this decade-old horrific crisis? We did our utmost, as you know, with Norway to get that humanitarian resolution agreed. It was a tough, hard climb, hard won, and we got one crossing, Bab al-Hawa, kept open. I'm delighted that it was kept open. We're seeing now food and medical supplies delivered to 3.5 million people behind that line. And as we approach winter, it's unthinkable that we wouldn't have that cross-border mechanism up and running in operation. It's absolutely required. And I just want a little parenthesis here to say there was actually a wonderful development this week, but we don't see much coverage of it, that the cross-line deliveries have started. It was the first, we've seen two, I think, in the last couple of days. I think there was one yesterday as well. WFP delivering from Aleppo into Idlib. We're seeing food arrive cross-line. That has been an ongoing bugbear and concern that we couldn't seem to manage. I think the resolution was directly a contributory factor in that, so I'm delighted to see that happen. We want to get on to deal with both the political solution. Geir Pedersen coming up to his 6th Constitutional Committee outing soon, and we're seeing really no progress there. We pushed that in the last meeting of the Security Council. We'll continue to push for engagement by the Syrian government. But when it comes to the issues you raised on detainees, forcibly displaced people, people who have been disappeared, we are big supporters, of course, of the IIIM mechanism. We insist that all those who have perpetrated these horrendous crimes be brought to justice, and we are fully part of the part of the council that speaks to that point every time. We don't see things in an eclipsed way. The big picture here is a horrific one. It's a desperate crisis, and it's gone on too long. And if I'm honest, I don't think the council, Qua Council, has shown itself to be up to the job, certainly on Syria. Thanks.
Thanks. And the final question from online goes to Pam in CBS.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Ambassador, for the briefing. We're looking forward to the month. It's Pam Falk from CBS. My question first is, on September 23rd, what is your expectation? Can you flesh it out on the climate and security meeting? It is during high-level week, so do you expect some heads of state there? Do you expect some product out of it? And on a totally different subject, on the Afghanistan resolution, can you explain this, why it ended up with safe passage rather than safe zone as the UK and France had first announced it? Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks, Pam. On the question of climate and security, it's an elevated, high-level discussion, and we will have our Taoiseach, COVID allowing, in the chair on the day. We would love to see other heads of state and government present, and we have some indications there will be a number of them still in New York at that time. So we're looking forward to that discussion. It's a contested issue at the table, as you know. Not everyone recognises the impact of climate on peace and security, and we want to use this debate to open up the issue. We know, we can see in very specific areas, we're all familiar with the SIDS and Sahel, and we speak to those as the fragile contexts that take the brunt of climate insecurity. But actually, if you look at some of the other regions of the world, like Somalia, or indeed look to Myanmar, fragile, conflict-ridden countries, they are very high on the index of climate challenge countries. So we're seeing this link right across the agenda of the Council, and we want to advance the work of the Council in the first instance, in country-specific instances, to better understand what is this interaction, how does it affect what we're dealing with by way of effort at the Council to improve the fragile context. Will there be a product? I hope that there will be a product. We're not aiming for a product on the day, and I can be clear about that. It's not a negotiation of a resolution that we have this debate for. We want to get the political message from that high level, and we'll assess what the messaging is after that debate. We're working on this very closely, as you know, with Niger, Ireland and Niger pair on a number of issues on the Council, hunger and conflict being one indeed, which is not irrelevant in Tigray. But when it comes to looking at climate and security, we have advanced the work at an expert level quite considerably this year from a base that was, if you think this time last year, there was no working group per se on climate and security. So we've moved the issues along. We've done it in a constructive way, in a cooperative way around the Council. We have certainly the majority of countries in the Council who would be like-minded on the risks of not paying attention to climate and security. So I would like to think it's a moment where the Council, it's probably past time, that the Council actually expressed its views on this, but we'll try and do it in a way that we bring everyone along with us. So we'll wait and see when that will be.
Thanks,
yeah, I'm sorry, you did ask me.
Thank you.
Okay, that's fine.
Yes.
Thanks, Ambassador. We only have about 9 minutes left. There's still a lot of interest in the room, and I'm going to start with the order I have you written down, but just so in the interest of transparency, I'm going to go to Kirsten from Al Jazeera. There's two ladies at the back who've had their hands up from the beginning, so I'll go to them, and then I have Frank and Evelyn, and I'm seeing some new hands as well. But starting with Kirsten, and we'll fit in as many as we can. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Kristen Salumi from Al Jazeera English. Edie asked about pressure points on Afghanistan. Ambassador Woodward, after the meeting, talked about sanctions, either the lifting of sanctions or imposing new ones as a possible pressure point to use against the Taliban. I'm wondering if you think that's realistic, given what we saw with China and Russia on the initial statement. Do you see that as a viable tool? And there are those in the NGO community, women's rights groups who are calling for even stronger action in terms of a peacekeeping force in Afghanistan. Is that something that you could contemplate in the future for Afghanistan? Thanks.
Well, thank you. Look, when it comes to imposing or lifting sanctions, our view is always that sanctions are not an end in themselves. They're just an instrument to be used in specific cases. And I think it's a little early to start thinking about what our precise Security Council positions will be. One thing that I want to say, as Ireland certainly, is that anywhere, and particularly in the context of European Union and sanctions, anywhere we are engaged in sanctions, we are absolutely clear that there are humanitarian carve-outs in those sanctions. And I think as you look to the current situation in Afghanistan, I've heard the Secretary General very clearly say the pressures on the Afghan society, on their economy, on access to food, etc., is so extraordinary that we would need to be very, very careful about making that situation worse. And I think as Ireland, we would look very carefully at what the best instruments are. Not always sanctions. In some cases, we absolutely believe we like targeted sanctions, sanctions typically imposed on individuals who have in some way, in many cases, committed criminal activities. So we are much more concerned right now with the humanitarian and the basic human rights situation. I think talk about a peacekeeping force, there's, as it were, loose talk around about it, and I understand why. When I came to the UN, the then Irish Taoiseach said that the blue helmet was as important to the Irish people as the harp, and that's true. So we are peacekeepers at heart, but I think it's important that we make sure that where we deploy our peacekeepers, there's a clear first of all, a welcome that they can actually get on the ground and work. We don't know what the situation would be, but also a capacity. So I think it's for a longer term discussion. I think all the UN assistance that's possible for Afghanistan should be available, but I think it's premature to talk right now about a peacekeeping operation.
Thanks very much, Ambassador. I'm going to go to the second last row, starting on my left, and then we're coming to you afterwards. I'm sorry that I don't know your names. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Here at the back. Betül Yürük, Turkish news agency, Anadolu. A couple of questions on Afghanistan, if I may. Who do you think should represent Afghanistan during the high-level week, starting in 3 weeks? And you also said that women, peace and security will be at the center during your presidency. Do you have any plans to invite Afghan women to one of those meetings? Thank you.
Well, on the question of who should represent Afghanistan during high-level week, we still have an accredited ambassador here, and that ambassador's credentials, as far as I'm aware, have not been contested. So I would expect the ambassador to represent his country at the high-level week. On WPS, we will be bringing the voices of young women. I've already worked very closely myself with Afghan women, with the Afghan Women Leaders Network. I've engaged with them. We've indeed had women from Northern Ireland who were peace builders extraordinaire work with Afghan women in the past. So I would hope we will have the voice of some Afghan women during the course of the month, yes.
Thanks very much. Yes, in the second last row.
Ambassador, for this briefing. I'm Carla Stade, Global Research. I notice on the 19th you have meeting threats to international peace and security caused by terrorist acts, and there have been many of these, and the emphasis is very much on policing and repression. It seems to be not enough emphasis on the causes. You in Ireland have a very brilliant psychiatrist who has focused upon the causes, and he contributed very much to the Good Friday peace settlements with Senator Mitchell some years ago. That's Lord John Alderdice. Mm-hmm. What are the chances of having him address the Security Council on the root causes of terrorism? There have been many movie stars, but why not have a very great psychiatrist speak on the subject?
Particularly an Irish psychiatrist.
Indeed.
Right. I'm afraid I'm not sure. Are you talking about the CTAD meeting? You mentioned the 19th, and we don't actually have a meeting on the 19th.
It says here, unless I have the wrong, or I have the
I'm just wondering which meeting you mean.
I'm afraid I have the wrong. Well, in any case,
the terrorism meeting.
Yeah, why not have him speak? Because
well, look, yeah.
He knows more than anybody else.
Well, certainly we have experience on the island of Ireland. I like to say of knowing what it's like not to have the ground secure under our feet, but of course of terrorism and terrorist acts. We certainly have, luckily 2 decades later, we have a sustainable peace on the island. But Lord Alderdice is well respected, and so we'll certainly look into that. I think that meeting is chaired by the Tunisian colleagues, and so we will recommend. I must admit we hadn't thought about that previously. We're certainly convinced that root causes are not looked at often enough in terms of conflict, and certainly in terms of terrorism. We know that there are decades of challenge that have been behind some of the support we now see for emerging groups of terrorists. So we will talk to our Tunisian colleagues about that.
Thanks, Ambassador. And just to say, the 13th of September is the meeting of the Counterterrorism Committee. It doesn't appear in the programme of work, but that's chaired by the Tunisians, and that's what the Ambassador is referring to. We have time maybe for one final question from Frank. I know there's lots of hands, and I'm sorry we won't be able to reach everybody, but we'll do our best. So, Frank, we'll start with you. Thanks.
Thank you. Ambassador, congratulations on your presidency for September. We hope to see more of you. With regard to the UN Charter and Chapter 7, do you see the takeover of Afghanistan by the Taliban as a threat to peace and security in the region? Because you were talking about hearing from regional countries before. And the other thing is, what is your opinion on the U.S. freezing of assets, financial assets of Afghanistan? Do you believe that should remain intact until you are satisfied as to how they will behave in the future?
Well, in terms of a threat to international peace and security, we have to wait and see, frankly. The issue is clearly one that has destabilized an important country and indeed has spillover effects in the region. That's why I underlined in my remarks that we want to also hear from countries in the region. There has been a democratically elected government overthrown by the Taliban. We're waiting to see what the outcome of that looks like. So in terms of the freezing of assets, I think that the period of uncertainty will in itself dictate what the US decides to do in terms of, they will speak for themselves obviously, but I think it's very early days. We've had a very rocky 10 days in the region. I don't think anyone knows what's ahead, and I would think a conservative approach in terms of access to resources is something to be recommended until we get a sight of what's ahead.
Maybe we have time for one final question, but the ambassador does have to go to brief member states, and I think Evelyn has had her hand up for the longest time. We do have another meeting at 3, so we'll be available to you throughout the month. I will, Megan will, and the ambassador will every day.
Thank you
So,
very
Evelyn.
much. Evelyn Leopold. Good to see you again, Ambassador. I wanted to ask about Myanmar. Is there any chance that you would name in public those countries who are supplying military equipment to the junta?
Thanks, Evelyn. It's a very good question. And just to flag, Ambassador, we also had questions online we didn't have time for about the situation in Myanmar generally and whether the Council will address that in the month of September. So maybe we could take these two questions together.
Yeah, look, the situation in Myanmar, the still unfolding crisis is really a major concern. I mean, again, I want to say we're very worried about the forced disappearances following the coup, and particularly the abuse of women. What we're seized of now at the Security Council under the British penholder recently, we had a real discussion on the humanitarian aspects of Myanmar, and that's something that we're worried about. Access to medicine and food, reaching crisis levels now, obstacles to that, and politicisation of humanitarian aid. We're hopeful for now the next step will be an engagement. That hasn't yet happened. We have the UN envoy and we have the ASEAN envoy, the Foreign Minister of Brunei, who are both mandated really to engage with the Tatmadaw in what we regard as the dire situation. I'm not sure until we get that engagement, until we have a better handle on what's happening on the ground, that naming and shaming would bring us any further in a discussion. But we are very worried about the humanitarian situation, discussed it just this morning with our British colleagues. I think in the course of September you will find us watching, if not acting on this very, very soon. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you, everybody, for your questions. We really appreciate your interest. We'll be available to you throughout the month. And thanks also to the technicians who made this an extremely smooth process. We really appreciate your help and look forward to seeing you throughout the month of September. Thank you, everybody.
And I will continue with the next part of the briefing, and I will brief you on a few things, and then there will be time for questions for me. So, today, on climate, a new report by the World Meteorological Organization today said weather-related disasters have increased fivefold and caused 7 times more damage than in the 1970s. Over the past 50 years, weather-related disasters have killed 115 people every day and caused some $202 million in losses daily. However, improved early warnings and disaster management have meant that the number of deaths has decreased significantly from previous periods. Over the past 50 years, there were more than 11,000 reported disasters globally, with just over 2 million deaths and $3.64 trillion in losses. The report also says that more than 91% of deaths occurred in developing countries, and of the top 10 disasters, the hazards that led to the largest human losses during this period have been droughts, followed by storms, floods, and extreme temperatures. The full report is online. Moving to Ethiopia, our colleagues tell us that the humanitarian situation in Tigray is worsening, with stocks of relief aid, cash, and fuel running very low or depleted. Partners have run out of stocks for food distribution, with the exception of some areas where supplies had already been dispatched. According to our colleagues, the only access route to Tigray via Afar, using the Samara-Abala corridor, has been inaccessible since the 22nd of August due to insecurity and bureaucratic and logistical challenges. We estimate that 100 trucks of food, non-food items, and fuel need to enter Tigray every day to sustain an adequate response. Since the 12th of July to date, less than 10% of the required trucks have gone in. In addition, a minimum of 200,000 liters of fuel is required for the humanitarian response every week. But since the 12th of July, only 282,000 liters have reached Tigray, and none since the 16th of August. Our humanitarian colleagues also warned that the spillover of the conflict in Tigray into neighboring Afar and Amhara continues to affect civilians, resulting in food insecurity, displacement, and the disruption of livelihoods. Some 1.7 million people are estimated to be facing food insecurity in those areas. We stress that all parties to the conflict must allow and facilitate timely, unfettered, safe, and sustained access to all people impacted by the crisis. Turning to Myanmar, our team there remains concerned by the humanitarian impact of the ongoing armed conflict and insecurity across various parts of the country. Around 200,000 people have been displaced since February 1st. The situation has worsened with the impact of monsoon floods, which affected around 125,000 people since July, particularly in the southeast, eastern, and western parts of the country. Our team and our partners are making efforts to reach around 3 million people in need with critical assistance and protection services, including a pandemic response. For example, around 1.2 million people have received food and cash assistance since the beginning of the year, and assistance across other sectors also continues in other parts of the country. Our colleagues reiterate their earlier calls for everyone involved to facilitate safe and unimpeded access by humanitarian partners to scale up these efforts and reach everyone in need. We reaffirm our commitment to continue delivering humanitarian assistance, protection services, and COVID-19 related assistance in Myanmar, guided by the internationally recognized principles of humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence. And in the Central African Republic, the mission there has taken note of the final results of the residual legislative elections of July 25th, proclaimed by the Constitutional Court. This announcement marked the end of the 2020 to 2021 legislative elections in the country, with 140 candidates elected to parliament, including 18 women. The mission has provided support to this electoral process, including through security, in a context that, as you will recall, was marked by attacks in the capital, Bangui, and in the countryside. The mission there is currently working with the authorities to begin preparations for local elections, which will be the first ones organized since 1988. And our peacekeeping colleagues also responded to attacks by armed groups this week, particularly in the country's west and center. And the UN police units continue their day-to-day patrols in the capital's sensitive crossroads and elsewhere. The mission said today these patrols have contributed to a drop in crime in the capital as well as in the country's eastern region. And I just want to flag that in response to questions we have received, I can tell you that on the 19th of August, the state of Qatar signed an agreement to provide $40 million through the UN in support of poor and vulnerable families in the Gaza Strip. The allocated amount will be disbursed through a UN-implemented cash assistance program to some 100,000 families in Gaza as a one-time payment every month for a period of 4 months. As the program is about to be rolled out, the Secretary General wishes to extend his appreciation to the state of Qatar for its generous contribution, noting that this will help improve the dire socioeconomic and humanitarian situation in Gaza. The UN will continue to work closely with the Palestinian Authority and partners to support reconstruction efforts in this region. And I have a COVAX update for you. Pakistan has received over 18 million vaccine doses since May and has 6 more million doses expected to arrive in September. As of yesterday, more than 56 million doses have been administered. Our team there, led by resident coordinator Julian Arnaiz, is continuing its support to the national response. The World Health Organization established 3 vaccination centers in Islamabad and provided medical, laboratory, and protective equipment, including ambulances, 50 ventilators, 100 oxygen concentrators, 50 suction devices, 20 ECG machines, and 50 automated beds. For its part, the UN Children's Fund provided protective equipment to over 15,000 frontline workers, as well as over 3,000 oxygen concentrators and other equipment to the government. The UN Refugee Agency also donated 600,000 masks and ambulances, and the UN Office for Project Services is providing medical and laboratory equipment for hospitals in 3 districts. And you may have seen that earlier today, German Chancellor Angela Merkel and Dr. Tedros, the head of the World Health Organization, inaugurated a new WHO hub for pandemic and epidemic intelligence based in Berlin. The hub is part of the agency's Health Emergencies program and will support the work of public health experts and policymakers in all countries. It will aim to provide them with the tools needed to forecast, detect, and assess epidemic and pandemic risks so they can take rapid decisions to prevent and respond to future public health emergencies. Dr. Tedros said the work of the new hub will focus on data linkage and analysis and on the ability to better detect and assess risks of disease events in the earliest stages before they amplify and cause death and societal disruption. The hub is receiving an initial investment of $100 million from Germany. And in a new report, the International Labour Organization says that despite the unprecedented worldwide expansion of social protection during the pandemic, more than 4 billion people around the world remain entirely unprotected. The World Social Protection Report finds that the pandemic response was uneven and insufficient, deepening the gap between countries with high and low income levels, and failing to provide the much-needed social protection that all human beings deserve. Social protection includes access to healthcare and income security, such as unemployment, sickness, or disability leave. The ILO is calling for more investments and international solidarity to build better social protection systems. And you can find the report online. And I want to flag that today at 2 p.m. right here, there will be a briefing by Ambassador Geraldine Byrne-Nason, the permanent representative of the Republic of Ireland and President of the Security Council for this month. And she will discuss the Council's program of work. And finally, we would like to thank our friends in Tanzania for their contribution to the regular budget. That brings us to 124 member states who have paid their contributions in full. And I think that's it from me. I will take your questions now. Any questions? Yes.
Thank you very much. And so, given the reports about shaping the new government by Taliban, and so it's about there are no officials from previous government, and so what's about the question, the consideration of inclusive government, given the fact that UN, the other agencies, and international community calls for inclusive government? Thank you.
I mean, is your question, I guess the Security Council made it very clear, and the Secretary General also made it very clear in his statement yesterday that what we are expecting is to see an inclusive government, and of course we're waiting to see what will happen as the government has not yet been formed, and although we know that that is to be announced imminently following. Any other questions? Did Ramiz answer all your questions? I'm very happy about that. Any questions on the screen?
Thank
Thank you for listening today, and thank you for supporting us with our sponsors. Please go to depictions.media for more information and click on our contact link and let us know how we can help bring your story and help bring us to a better world. This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.